Okay, what we're going to do here is remove a modern day crank, check the bearings. This is what they call a press fit system. So in these type of frames, which you'll find pretty much every bike, whether it be mountain bike or road bike over sort of 2012 onwards, is running the press fit system. It does away with threading the internal bottom bracket, which is really good for your carbon fibre frames. You don't have that aluminium piece that's constantly having threads wound in and out. So what we do to remove these cranks, we've got two bolts here, one facing that way, one facing the opposite way, both 5mm Allen bolts. They need to be released. This is a compression cap that runs into the spindle. It's a two-piece crank arm. I'll show you once we've got that out. We remove that once we've undone these two, or release the pressure on these two Allen keys. If we try to take this cap out without undoing these pinch bolts, we'll get nowhere because these crank arms are pulling in and squashing that cap once it's actually installed. So we'll back off those two 5mm bolts. This is a bottom bracket extraction tool for the little cap there. That's it. That's the cap out. Before we go any further, sliding this off, between the cutout on the back of the crank there's a little plastic wedge with a pin on it, which needs to be popped out, like that. The pin just stops the crank arm from sliding off the actual spindle itself. So that pin is part of the crank arm and stops it from sliding off if these pinch bolts come out, so just hold it onto the actual system. Once we've got the crank arm off, we can actually just remove the crank. So remove the chain. And the crank arm comes out like so. What we do, there's no shoulders on the spindle for any of these bottom bracket systems now, so it just runs on the shaft itself. So we need to just clean that up. Get rid of any grease and grit. Just run your finger along it and just check that there's no actual scoring on the actual spindle itself. They're a plated steel shaft, as you can see. It's had a seized bearing or something there at some stage and it's just polished up that area, but there's no actual groove in there, so that's all good. Now give it a good look, make sure the splines are okay. Put that aside. Now we need to check the bottom bracket. First of all, just with your finger, just rotate the bearings and make sure that they all spin freely and that there's no play in the bearing if we move it fore and aft. These are pressed into the frame with a plastic shell or cup holding the bearing, so when you remove them, that's basically the actual plastic cup's destroyed. So if you can leave them in the bike while you're doing the inspection, if they need to be replaced, obviously the whole lot has to come out. Sealed bearing again, so just on a rag with a bit of cleaner, just clean up any of the grit around the actual bearing in the frame. Both sides. Now we're ready to apply a bit of grease to the spindle, just on the mating surfaces of where it's going to mate up with the bearing, and a little bit on the splines. Just a waterproof grease. Feed the crank through. Sitting the chain back on the chainring. Give our crank arm that we removed earlier a clean, all the splines, get all the grit and old grease out, and we're ready to reinstall. Obviously making sure we're perpendicular with the crank arm on the other side. Our plastic crank arm bolt again, our tool, this tool is designed so that you can't over tighten it. It's to be done by hand and it's plastic, and that's all the preload that you need to take out any sideways movement in that bottom bracket. Now we need to reset the pin. Push that down, you'll feel it click into position. Just bring these up to tension. And the last part we do with the torque wrench. Preset torque wrench once again. Graduated scale. Every crank manufacturer is different, so I'm not going to tell you what torque to do these at. Check the crank manufacturer's instructions before you torque anything up. Just double check them once you reach torque on both, that they will get a little bit more movement once the other one reaches its torque, so just back and forth a few times and we're all good. Just wipe down. And that's a press fit bottom bracket.